Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands, February 16th, 1944. Commander Takeo Yoshimura stood in the operations room of the 4th Fleet headquarters, reading the latest intelligence summary for the third time. The Americans were coming. Reconnaissance aircraft had spotted them, a massive carrier force steaming toward Truk with a speed and confidence that suggested they no longer feared Japanese power in these waters. He studied the ship identification reports: 5 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers, 7 battleships, among them 2 names that meant nothing to him 3 months ago: Iowa and New Jersey, the newest American battleships, commissioned less than a year earlier. The intelligence file on his desk contained specifications compiled from neutral observers and intercepted communications. Displacement: 45,000 tons. Speed: 33 knots. Main armament: 9 16-inch guns. Yoshimura set down the report and reached for the tactical assessment prepared by his staff. The Iowa-class ships were fast. Yes, faster than any battleship Japan had ever built, except the Congo-class, which were really battle cruisers, in all but name. But speed wasn't everything. The report noted their relatively light armor compared to Yamato, thinner belt armor, less deck protection, smaller guns than the 18.1-inch monsters mounted on Japan's super battleships. The assessment concluded what Yoshimura had already believed: the Iowa class represented American industrial capacity, not American naval supremacy. They were fast escorts for carrier groups, not true battleship killers. In a surface engagement with Yamato or Musashi, they would be outgunned and outmatched. The Imperial Japanese Navy's doctrine of building fewer but individually superior warships remained sound. That assessment would be obsolete by sunset tomorrow. The morning of February 17th arrived with tropical heat and humidity that made uniforms cling to skin. Yoshimura had been awake since 0300, coordinating the evacuation of remaining fleet units. Most of the combined fleet had already withdrawn to Palau weeks earlier, a prudent decision given the growing American threat, but dozens of auxiliaries, transports, and damaged warships remained in the lagoon, along with 365 aircraft spread across Truk's 5 airfields. At 0630, the American carriers launched their strike. Grumman fighters swept in first, attacking the airfields with a precision that spoke to months of training and preparation. Within 90 minutes, 200 Japanese aircraft were destroyed on the ground or shot down in futile attempts to defend the base. The sky over Truk filled with the smoke of burning aircraft and fuel dumps. But Yoshimura's attention wasn't on the air battle. His focus was on the surface action developing north of the atoll. The light cruiser Katori, auxiliary cruiser Akagimaru, destroyers Maikaze and Nawaki, and a small minesweeper were attempting to escape through North Pass, running for open ocean, where they might evade the American carriers. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The radio reports came in fragments: Katori under air attack, Akagimaru hit by dive bombers, Maikaze taking evasive action. Then a new message that made Yoshimura's blood run cold. American surface ships approaching from the north, battleships Iowa and New Jersey, accompanied by heavy cruisers and destroyers. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the 5th Fleet from New Jersey, had personally taken tactical command of the surface action group. He'd ordered his carrier aircraft to cease their attacks on the fleeing Japanese ships. He wanted the battleships to engage them directly, wanted to demonstrate what American naval power could accomplish in a surface action. Captain Tamakio Oda commanded Katori, a training cruiser never designed for combat against modern warships. His ship displaced 5,800 tons. She carried 4 5.5-inch guns as main armament. Her armor was thin, designed to protect against destroyer gunfire. Nothing more. And now he was facing battleships mounting 16-inch guns that fired shells weighing 2,700 pounds. The action began at 14,000 yards. Iowa's fire control radar acquired Katori with a precision that would have been impossible using optical rangefinders alone. The American fire control system, the Mark 38 with Mark 8 radar, could track targets through haze, smoke, darkness. It provided range bearing, target speed, and direction continuously, automatically feeding corrections to the gun directors. Oda never had a chance. Iowa's first salvo straddled Katori, one shell falling short, one beyond. The second salvo hit. A 16-inch high-capacity shell struck Katori's starboard side, punching through her thin armor like paper before detonating inside the hull. The explosion created a hole 5 feet wide. Another shell hit amidships, tearing through deck plating and rupturing fuel lines. Within minutes, Katori was listing heavily, fires raging through her superstructure. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes. Iowa fired 8 salvos, 4 scored direct hits. The training cruiser that had been built to prepare young officers for naval service became target practice for the most advanced battleship in the American fleet. At 14:45, Katori rolled over and sank stern first, 40 miles northwest of Truk. Captain Oda went down with his ship. Of the 530 men aboard, none were rescued. But the engagement wasn't over. Destroyer Nowaki, newer and faster than Katori, attempted to escape. Captain Shinobu Satsuki pushed his ship to maximum speed, 35 knots, and began evasive maneuvers. He knew he couldn't fight the American battleships. His only hope was to outrun them or disappear into the sun's glare where visual tracking would be impossible. Iowa and New Jersey gave chase at 32.5 knots. The range opened to 35,000 yards, 20 miles, beyond the visual horizon. Under normal circumstances, with traditional optical rangefinders, this would have been the end of the engagement. No ship could accurately target another vessel at that distance using visual sighting alone. The curvature of the Earth placed the target below the horizon. Spotting shell splashes for range corrections would be nearly impossible, but Iowa's fire control wasn't limited by visual sighting. The Mark 8 radar tracked Nowaki continuously. The fire control computer calculated the solution, accounting for target speed, range rate, ship's own motion, wind direction, Earth's rotation. The solution was fed automatically to the turrets. Gun elevation and bearing adjusted with mechanical precision. At 35,700 yards, Iowa and New Jersey opened fire. Their first salvos straddled Nowaki. One shell splashed on the destroyer's port side, the other to starboard. The near misses were so close that shell splinters peppered Nowaki's deck, causing casualties among the crew. The Japanese destroyer's crew watched in horror as massive shell splashes erupted around them from guns they couldn't even see over the horizon. Satsuki altered course, zigzagging desperately. The American battleships adjusted fire. Another salvo bracketed Nowaki, then another. The range extended to 39,000 yards. The last salvo fell at approximately 22 statute miles from Iowa's guns. It was the longest-ranged gunfire ever directed at an enemy ship by an American battleship. A record that demonstrated not just the range of the 16-inch guns, but the sophistication of the fire control system that could actually hit targets at such distances. Nowaki escaped, damaged but afloat by disappearing into gathering darkness and using her superior speed, but the engagement had revealed something that would fundamentally alter Japanese understanding of what they faced. Back at Truk, Yoshimura received the reports as they came in. Katori sunk, Akagi Maru destroyed, Maikaze sunk, Nowaki damaged, escaped, but it was the details of the engagement that troubled him most. The accuracy of American gunfire at extreme range, the ability to track and engage targets beyond visual distance, the precision of fire control that could straddle a maneuvering destroyer at 20 miles. He pulled out the intelligence assessment on Iowa-class battleships. Again, the specifications were accurate. The guns did have a maximum range of approximately 24 statute miles, but the assessment had dismissed this as theoretical range, the kind of number that looked impressive on paper but meant nothing in actual combat. No ship could hit another at such distances. Fire control systems weren't accurate enough. Shell dispersion was too wide. The practical engagement range for battleship guns was 15 to 18,000 yards. Perhaps 20,000 in ideal conditions, except the Americans had just engaged effectively at 35,000 yards. They'd straddled a target at 39,000 yards. They'd hit Katori repeatedly at ranges where Japanese battleships would still be trying to establish optical contact. Yoshimura began writing his report to Combined Fleet Headquarters. He chose his words carefully, knowing that unfavorable intelligence was often dismissed as exaggeration or defeatism. But the facts were undeniable. The Americans possessed fire control technology that fundamentally changed naval warfare. They could engage targets their opponents couldn't even see. They could maintain accurate fire while maneuvering at high speed. They could fight effectively in conditions where optical rangefinders were useless. The implications were staggering. Yamato's advantages in armor and gun caliber suddenly seemed less decisive. What good was heavier armor if the enemy could hit you before you could even acquire them as a target? What good were 18-inch guns if your fire control system required visual contact while the enemy could shoot over the horizon? Japanese naval doctrine had been built on assumptions about engagement ranges and fire control capabilities. Those assumptions were now obsolete. The Americans hadn't just built fast battleships. They'd created weapons systems that operated according to different rules that gave them advantages Japanese designers hadn't anticipated. 3 days later, the report reached Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita at Combined Fleet Headquarters in Yokosuka. He read it twice, then called his staff together. Several officers were present, including gunnery specialists who understood fire control systems and their limitations. "Is this possible?" Kurita asked, gesturing at the engagement report. "Effective fire at 35,000 yards against a maneuvering target." Commander Toshio Miyazaki, the fleet's senior gunnery officer, studied the report. He'd trained on Yamato, understood her fire control system intimately. "The range is possible, Admiral. Yamato's guns can reach similar distances, but accuracy at such range against a moving target using traditional optical rangefinders." He paused. "It should be impossible." "And yet, they did it." "Yes, sir. Which means their fire control is significantly more advanced than we understood. The reports mention radar. We know the Americans have been developing radar-based fire control. It appears they've solved problems we haven't." Kurita turned to the intelligence officer present. "What do we know about American radar fire control?" Captain Hideo Yamada opened his file. "Limited information, Admiral. We know they've equipped their newer battleships with fire control radar. We've captured some equipment from damaged American ships, but our understanding remains incomplete. Based on interrogation of prisoners and technical analysis, we believe their radar can provide continuous range and bearing data, automatically feeding corrections to the gun directors. Can we match this technology?" Silence. Then Yamada spoke carefully. "Our radar development is progressing, but we're years behind American capabilities. The equipment we've captured is far more sophisticated than what our factories can produce. Even if we had complete technical specifications, manufacturing such systems would require industrial capacity we don't possess." There it was again, the fundamental constraint that kept appearing in every strategic discussion: industrial capacity. The Americans could produce advanced fire control systems because they had the factories, the skilled workers, the resources. They could equip every battleship with radar that cost more than an entire Japanese destroyer because they had the money and manufacturing base to make such extravagant standard practice. Kurita looked at the engagement report again. Iowa had fired perhaps 80 rounds during the action, a relatively modest expenditure. But those rounds had sunk one cruiser, helped sink a destroyer, damaged another destroyer, and demonstrated fire control capabilities that made Japanese optical rangefinders obsolete. "We need to revise our tactical doctrine," Kurita said. "If American battleships can engage effectively at ranges where we're still trying to establish visual contact, our standard battle line tactics won't work. They'll shoot us to pieces before we can return fire." Miyazaki nodded. We'll need to close the range quickly, get inside 20,000 yards where our optical systems remain competitive. But that means accepting hits during the approach, and Iowa-class ships are fast, 33 knots. They can dictate range, choose whether to close or open distance. What about Yamato? Could she survive long enough to close range? Yamato's armor is exceptional. She could probably absorb hits from 16-inch guns at extreme range without catastrophic damage. But we'd be taking damage while unable to return effective fire. And if Iowa closes to optimal range for her fire control while staying outside our effective range. Miyazaki didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The strategic implications were clear enough. In any surface engagement, American battleships would have first shot. They could open fire while Japanese ships were still trying to establish ranging solutions. They could maintain accurate fire while maneuvering at high speed. They could fight effectively in conditions where Japanese fire control would fail. Darkness, haze, long range. And this was just one aspect of American technological superiority. The Iowa-class battleships also possessed superior damage control systems, better radar for surface search and air warning, more advanced communications equipment. Every system was designed with the assumption that resources were abundant, that the best solution was to install the most sophisticated equipment available, regardless of cost. Japanese ships were designed under opposite assumptions. Resources were scarce. Every system represented a compromise between capability and cost. Radar was limited because sophisticated radar required resources better spent elsewhere. Fire control was based on optical rangefinders because they were reliable, relatively inexpensive, and sufficient for expected engagement conditions. Except those expected conditions no longer applied. The Americans had changed the rules of naval warfare through technological superiority enabled by industrial supremacy, and Japan had no way to match them. Kurita spent the evening reviewing battle plans. The combined fleet still possessed formidable strength. Yamato and Musashi remained the most powerful battleships ever built. The heavy cruiser force was experienced and well-trained. The destroyer squadrons were among the best in the world, their Type 93 torpedo giving them a weapon far superior to anything the Americans possessed. But every plan now had to account for American technological advantages: radar-directed gunfire, superior damage control, overwhelming air power from carrier groups that could launch 500 aircraft in a single strike, and industrial capacity that meant every ship lost was irreplaceable, while American losses were replaced by new construction within months. The engagement at Truk wasn't a major battle. The ships sunk were minor units, auxiliaries and destroyers that would barely register in official histories. But the tactical lessons were profound. The Americans weren't just outproducing Japan, they were out-innovating Japan, creating weapon systems that operated with capabilities Japanese designers hadn't imagined possible. Kurita closed the reports and looked at the map on his wall. The American advance across the Pacific was marked with dated pins showing the capture of the Marshalls, the ongoing campaign in the Marianas. Each pin represented another base lost, another position abandoned. The defensive perimeter Japan had fought to establish was contracting week by week, month by month, and now there was this new reality to consider. American battleships that could hit what they couldn't see, that could fight effectively at ranges where Japanese doctrine said accurate fire was impossible, that represented technological sophistication Japan couldn't match. The war was being lost on multiple fronts simultaneously: production capacity, technological innovation, training and preparation. But perhaps the most fundamental loss was psychological. The understanding, spreading through the combined fleet's command structure, that they were fighting an enemy who didn't just have more ships and aircraft, but better ships and aircraft, an enemy who was winning not just through quantity, but through quality. That realization would shape every decision made over the next 18 months. Every battle plan would be written with the knowledge that American technology gave them advantages Japanese skill and courage couldn't overcome. Every engagement would begin with the Americans holding fire control superiority radar superiority, communications superiority. The Iowa-class battleships, initially dismissed as fast but relatively light escorts, now represented something more threatening. They were proof that American industrial might could produce not just more weapons, but fundamentally better weapons, ships that redefined what was possible in naval warfare. And there were 4 of them: Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin, with more planned, each one mounting 9 guns that could throw a ton of steel 23 miles with accuracy that made that range practical, rather than theoretical. Each one capable of 33 knots sustained speed, each one equipped with fire control systems that cost more to develop than Japan had spent on all naval radar research combined. Yoshimura's report from Truk reached the Naval General Staff in Tokyo 2 weeks later. It was read, analyzed, and filed with other intelligence reports documenting American technological superiority. No formal response was issued. No revision of tactical doctrine ordered. The implications were too uncomfortable. The solutions too impossible, given Japan's resource constraints. But the knowledge spread through the officer corps, in wardrooms and planning sessions, in tactical discussions and strategic assessments. The engagement at Truk was referenced. The story was told of Iowa firing at 20 miles, hitting what she couldn't see, demonstrating capabilities that seemed to belong to a future generation of warships rather than current equipment. Japanese battleship commanders hearing these stories understood what they meant. In any surface engagement with American battleships, they would be at a fundamental disadvantage. They would be shot at before they could return fire. They would be hit by shells from guns over the horizon. Their optical fire control, the pride of the Imperial Navy, would be obsolete before the battle even began. The psychological impact was insidious. It wasn't defeat in a major battle, wasn't the loss of a fleet engagement. It was the quiet realization that the tools they had, the systems they relied on, the doctrine they'd trained for, were inadequate against what the Americans could field. And unlike production disparity, which could theoretically be addressed through industrial expansion, or numerical inferiority, which could theoretically be overcome through superior tactics, this was a technological gap that couldn't be bridged. The radar systems, the fire control computers, the training and integration that made them effective, these required capabilities Japan simply didn't possess. The Iowa-class battleships had been designed to hunt down fast Japanese battleships like the Congo-class. They'd been built to escort carrier groups, to bombard shore positions, to show the flag in peacetime. But their most significant impact may have been psychological. They demonstrated to the Japanese Navy that they were not just outnumbered, but outmatched. That American industry could produce weapons systems Japan couldn't counter or copy. This realization would influence every major naval decision over the final 18 months of the war. From the Battle of the Philippine Sea to Leyte Gulf to the final suicide mission of Yamato, Japanese commanders would operate with the knowledge that American technological superiority gave them advantages that tactics and courage couldn't overcome. The 16-inch guns that could hit targets 23 miles away weren't just weapons. They were proof that Japan was fighting a war it couldn't win, against an enemy that had not only more resources, but better technology, more advanced systems, superior capabilities at every level of warfare. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The final phase of Japan's naval war was shaped by the knowledge gained at Truk, when Admiral Takeo Kurita led the center force toward Leyte Gulf in October 1944. His battle plans accounted for American radar superiority. His orders emphasized closing range quickly, accepting damage during approach, trying to negate the American fire control advantage through aggressive tactics and night actions. At the Battle off Samar, Kurita's force encountered American escort carriers protected by destroyers and destroyer escorts. He possessed overwhelming firepower superiority, but never achieved decisive results. Part of the reason was confusion and poor reconnaissance. But another factor was the psychological weight of knowing that even if he found the main American fleet, his ships would be engaged by radar-directed fire before his optical rangefinders could establish solutions. The hesitation that marked Kurita's actions at Samar, the decision to withdraw when victory seemed possible, cannot be understood without recognizing the accumulated psychological impact of fighting an enemy with systematic technological advantages. Officers who'd read the reports from Truk, who understood what Iowa-class battleships could do, approached every engagement knowing they were outmatched not just in numbers but in capabilities. By 1945, the question wasn't whether Japan could win naval battles, but whether naval battles mattered anymore. The war had moved beyond surface actions to carrier strikes and amphibious invasions. The Iowa-class battleships spent more time bombarding shore targets than engaging enemy warships. Their 16-inch guns, capable of precision fire at 23 miles, reduced coastal fortifications with methodical efficiency. The irony was complete. The battleships Japan had initially dismissed as secondary threats, as fast but relatively light escorts, had become symbols of American technological dominance, not because they sank dozens of Japanese ships in dramatic surface actions, but because they demonstrated capabilities that revealed the fundamental gap between what American industry could produce and what Japanese industry could match. The lesson of Iowa's guns firing over the horizon at Truk was this: modern warfare had become as much about technology and industry as about courage and skill. The Japanese Navy possessed both courage and skill in abundance, but they were fighting with fire control systems that belonged to an earlier era against an enemy whose radar and computers had redefined what was possible. When Japan surrendered in September 1945, Iowa was present in Tokyo Bay. Her 16-inch guns, silent now, represented the industrial and technological supremacy that had made Japan's defeat inevitable. Not because any single engagement was decisive, but because every engagement had demonstrated American advantages that couldn't be overcome through tactics or willpower. The guns that could hit targets 23 miles away hadn't won the war alone, but they'd proven a fundamental truth: that in modern industrial warfare, technological superiority, multiplied by production capacity, created advantages that traditional military virtues couldn't counter. The Japanese admirals had learned this lesson at Truk. The rest of the war was simply playing out the consequences. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.